You already advocate for women every day. Now take the next step with the University of Cincinnati College of Nursing's online Women's Health Nurse Practitioner program designed to help you lead, advocate, and make a difference in women's lives. Visit online.uc.edu/programs/nursing to get started. Greetings and welcome to AWHONN Insights, the home for candid nursing conversations. Today, we welcome Miranda Klassen, Executive Director of the Amniotic Fluid Embolism Foundation, a nonprofit she founded in 2008, and Kayleigh Summers, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist in private practice, who educates and supports those who've experienced perinatal trauma. Both guests are remarkable women who became maternal health advocates after they experienced amniotic fluid embolism, a severe complication of pregnancy and birth. They're going to share their path as survivors and road to advocacy. I'm your host, Bria Anopise, and Jamie Agunste, a perinatal nurse educator and 2022 AWHONN Emerging Leader, joins me today. Jamie, I'm so grateful that we can highlight this important topic. Podcast is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Bria. And Kayleigh and Miranda, thank you so much for being here. I know that your schedules are super busy. I know we last saw each other in June in Orlando at the AWHONN convention, and I'm so happy to see you again. Bria, Kayleigh, and Miranda and I go a ways back, and we work together and we are close friends. And so I'm so happy that they agreed to come talk to us a little bit about their work and AFE and how they often cross paths with AWHONN nurses and members. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Yes. So I wanted to start off by asking you both if you can briefly tell us a little bit about your birth experiences that brought you into advocacy. And I guess we can start with Miranda, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. So in terms of, sort of how did I get where I am? Really, I was just like many women. I had been in my marriage for a couple years and we were interested in starting a family. And, that path led us to both actually different careers, that experience. But, we had a fairly simple pregnancy, and 36 weeks in, I realized my water had broke and went to the hospital to give birth. And in that process, unfortunately, experienced an amniotic fluid embolism before our son was born. Sort of that classic triad of symptoms: cardiorespiratory collapse, hypotension, hypoxia, and then, unfortunately, pretty significant bleeding and DIC. I was not there for our son's birth. He was born emergently, and also needed to be resuscitated. And it was the days following that really sort of shook me to the core, if you will. At they had to intubate me in that process, and at extubation, I could read the room. I couldn't really talk. I was highly medicated and obviously very, very soon post-trauma, but I could read the room. My best friend, who didn't live in my state, who hadn't planned on being there, was in the room. And I had enough wits about me to realize that something was out of place. Like, she shouldn't have been there. Why was everybody in the room? Where was I? And it was then that one of the physicians or one of the team members had basically explained that I'd had an AFE and tried to explain what it was. I had never heard those words before. I had no idea what they were talking about. But what I do remember is them saying, you had a cardiac arrest and we had to resuscitate you. And most women die from this. It's a miracle you're here. And it was sort of that seed that got planted over the course of like the next 48, 72 hours of me really mentally struggling with why did I get this second chance? And then it was subsequently, just a few months later after going home. My background was biology and chemistry and very much a researcher. And so in that process, wanted to learn more about it and to reorient us. This was in 2008. Google had just gotten started. We were still asking Jeeves for, advice. Facebook had just gotten started. There was no Instagram, TikTok, nothing like that. In fact, most websites were just placeholders. There wasn't a PubMed. There was no information virtually online. And I just think about the last 17 years and how far we've come. I found myself at the library. It was the day before my birthday. I wanted nothing material for my birthday. I just wanted some time to go to the library, which was a place of solitude and peace for me to go figure out what I had just gone through. I'd had a lot of complications after going home, and I was very concerned about my well-being. And in that process of being at the library, essentially came to form the AFE Foundation. It was there in that afternoon where I think I was there for 6 hours reading the articles that were underscoring and supporting everything that the clinical team had shared, that this really was very fatal. And there wasn't a lot being done. And so it was sort of in that process, and also coming across a blog post of a woman who had passed away. Her and her son, Jenny and Broden, had passed away the same week that our son was born. They were blonde and blue, looked like us. And I just thought, how could they perish just a few days before we had had this experience? And so it was like the biggest motivator, I think, for me was recognizing that I needed to do something about it. I was not going to take this sort of second opportunity at life and squander it.
That is really something that you were able to have the wherewithal just within the first couple months to be able to do that. But I can say as a nurse in this space that we wouldn't have the knowledge that we have today without the foundation that you created. It's just, I think, really changed the game for all of us and for all of the families that are impacted by this, and the families that you serve and that we serve together. So thank you. Kayleigh, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you, Miranda, for sharing your story. I always hate to follow you. She created this massive foundation, all on her own on her birthday, which was actually only a few days from my AFE date, but 11 years later, if I'm doing my math correctly. I believe it was 11 years later. So I had a really similar story to Miranda's in that I had a healthy, typical pregnancy. I went in for an induction of labor due to some gestational hypertension. And 2.5 days later, I was 10 centimeters and ready to finally meet our son. And I, unfortunately, at that point, told my nurse I wasn't feeling well. She let me know it was kind of normal for transition. But I had that impending doom that you hear about so often right before an AFE or any sort of cardiac event. And I told my nurse that something was really wrong. And then I started screaming that something was wrong with my heart. And I proceeded seconds later to go into cardiopulmonary arrest. And so a code blue was called for my room. And I was thankfully rushed to the OR within 30 seconds of that code call. And my son was delivered within 6 minutes of that code call. And so he did need to be resuscitated, but was resuscitated quite quickly and whisked off as the team kind of turned toward me to figure out what was going on. And again, thanks to the work of the AFE Foundation, my team was aware of what an AFE is. At that point, my OB was trying to figure out what to do. She knew it was an AFE. She knew likely I was about to go into DIC. And so she actually prophylactically placed a Bakri balloon and called for an MTP before I began to bleed. And she was able to save my life in that way. I did go on to develop DIC. It was profound. I needed more than 140 units of blood. I went on to require ECMO and Impella support. I required a hysterectomy due to that DIC, as well as a right salpingo oophorectomy, so the removal of my right ovary. I was packed and left open for transport about 9 hours after my initial event. So I would suffer 2 cardiac arrests and then be put on ECMO. My heart, again, struggled to recover. So eventually an Impella was also placed along with ECMO support. And obviously lots of other things occurred within that time period. But 5 days later, a couple more abdominal surgeries, a decannulation from ECMO, and an extubation, I met my baby, my son Callahan, for the first time. I have no memory of that, but we have lots of beautiful pictures and videos. And the first memory I have is of my team debriefing me, and of them telling me exactly what happened, which is such an important piece of recovery that I often talk about, is being able to tell patients exactly what happened to them. And so I'm really grateful that that was my first memory. So when I was discharged after 14 days in the ICU, I was ecstatic to get to go home. It was this moment of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to go back to my life and be a mom. And so you can imagine how awful and terrifying and devastating it was when I realized that it was nothing like I imagined it was going to be. I cried pretty much every day. I was traumatized. I was depressed. And similarly to Miranda, there was unfortunately another AFE a month after me who did not survive. And so I very much told myself that I couldn't feel mad or sad because I got to be here. And even as a therapist, I was a licensed therapist at the time that this happened. I still told myself there was no room for my feelings. And so I guess similarly again to Miranda, about 6 months postpartum, I looked around and no one was talking about birth trauma. Miranda was talking about AFE, and we'll talk a little bit about how Miranda and I connected through this story. But no one was talking about when you expect the best day of your life and instead you're handed the worst. And no one was really talking about when everything goes wrong. And so I decided to, and that's really how the Birth Trauma Mama space was born. And I had no idea how much it would resonate. I just thought I was kind of sharing my story and hoped to connect with a few people. And just given the timing right before the pandemic, people were hungry to connect with other moms who had unfortunately experienced similar events.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about the platform that you have created for people to connect. And it's amazing to me how so many different people in I'll say our community, because I feel like we all kind of do this together now, have really been impacted by the work that you do. The three of us spoke together at the AWHONN convention in Phoenix, along with Suzanne McMurtry Baird. And there were like 550 people in the room to see that presentation. And just like Kayleigh not wanting to go after Miranda speaks, I don't ever want to go again after you speak. Miranda's laughing because she knows, because I was whispering to her, I don't know how I'm going to go after her because everybody was crying. I was crying and I had to get up and speak. And so people are really touched by the work that you did. And if anybody's interested in hearing more about what Kayleigh talked about with the debrief that she had with her providers, she actually did an episode on her podcast, the Birth Trauma Mama podcast, where she interviewed her OB, and her doctor told the story of what it was like to experience that from the provider perspective, and how that whole debrief and everything came to occur. So it was a really, really remarkable episode. I've listened to a lot of them, and that really stood out to me. But I wanted to go back to something that you said, and I want to connect the two of you because you both do work independently, you do work together, you're friends. And so can one of you tell us a little bit about how the two of you met and came to do the work together that you do and to be friends?
I'll let Miranda start because she knew about me before I knew she existed. So I'll let her start from when my OB called the foundation when I was still on ECMO and intubated, if that's okay, Miranda.
Of course. I definitely remember where I was. I could tell you I was driving in to pick up my son from a summer school program. And we got a call to our phone line, which I knew meant somebody had to know that number because it's not like a widely publicized number at that time. And I remember speaking with an OB who had a patient, and it's really sweet because I remember her saying, "This is a really special patient." And you always hear that in these cases when people call, "It's like such a special person." And she was really struggling with her decision to have performed a hysterectomy, and recognizing that Kayleigh was a therapist, and there was definitely a lot of medical literacy in Kayleigh's family, that this was going to be a really hard conversation to have, and that Kayleigh was really going to need a lot of support. And I assured her that that decision probably saved Kayleigh's life, and that we have to make decisions. That decisions have to be made in any aspect, whether it's in healthcare or anything. You have to make a decision at the time with all the knowledge that you have. And going back and looking retrospectively, sure, we can learn from that, but we also can't change that. And so I assured her that if and when Kayleigh was ready, we would be there to embrace her and give her a community of support. Recognizing now, fast forward, how much support Kayleigh offers to individuals. The support that we offered wasn't anything like what she's been able to offer, but what we did give was a validation and a space for her to connect with other people. And then I also very clearly remember the first time Kayleigh and I actually had to speak. So I already knew about Kayleigh. I think I actually maybe spoke to your mom, Kayleigh, even before I spoke to you. And I remember talking with Mary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also talking about how difficult not only this process was, but having had a hysterectomy. And again, assured her mom that we were going to be a safe space and we could talk about this. And then I sort of waited for Kayleigh to be ready. And I'll let Kayleigh kind of take it from there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember the exact conversation that Miranda, I was pacing in my little laundry room at the time because I was trying to be away from where my child was probably screaming. And everyone else was taking care of him. And I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. And I think Miranda doesn't ever really give herself enough credit for the work that she does and the support that she provides, because
She never does.
right. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you.
Not one.
And she's sitting here being like, "Oh, well, we didn't offer anywhere near the support that Kayleigh offers." And I love the compliment. I appreciate the flowers. And the birth, she doesn't understand this. And I tell her this all the time. The Birth Trauma Mama would not exist if the AFE Foundation did not first exist, because I never would have found my footing without her. Oh, it makes me a little teary. Without her and the foundation, and being able to get back on my feet again, because I knew that I wasn't alone. And not only that, but then I turned around and saw how incredible it was to see a force like Miranda Klassen, who decided that this has got to stop. I've got to find a way to help. And she just quite literally built that from the ground up. And when I looked around, as much as I am a medical hobbyist and I love the medical world, my skill set is not in the medical world. I'm not going to do the research. I'm not going to be the provider that is going to change these outcomes. But I do feelings. And I feel like feelings are a big part of surviving something like this. And that is where I can offer support, is in prevention, mitigation, and support of perinatal trauma. And so Miranda and I connecting is the only reason that my work and what I do is able to exist. And I think the way that we impact others, it's just really cool to see that domino effect. So watching as things like the AFE Foundation impact these survivors, who then go on to do things like blood drives, like the work that I'm doing, all because we were first supported enough to be able to heal. And that's just incredibly powerful.
I love working with Kayleigh because she brings so much to the space. And I remember as we get community members and they have a skill set, I'm like, we could totally use that skill set. This will be so great. They're going to be amazing advocates. And she's helped so many people go on to be able to do things. One of her closest friends just did a documentary 24 Days Without You, that she could not have done, I don't think, without the buy-in from a lot of people, but also from the support that Kayleigh was able to offer as she worked through that process. But on my wall are little angels, and Kayleigh, as you were talking, this was Allison Rose, who tragically passed away just a month after Kayleigh's. I remember that time as well. We had like 5 cases in the course of a month, and we only had 2 survivors, and they were actually both from Pennsylvania. And that was a difficult time for our community. But so as Kayleigh was sharing, I was thinking about her.
Me too. Thanks for sharing that, Miranda.
I love that. I just want to sit here for a second, but I want to hear about the work that both of you are doing. Kayleigh, can you tell us how you made the transition? Because you were not a birth trauma therapist before your AFE, but you were a therapist. Can you tell us kind of when you made that switch and how you became the birth trauma mama?
I would love to. So I was actually working at a boarding school, living and working at a boarding school at the time, which is a weird world. But I was a therapist there. And after my event, I pretty quickly knew that I wanted to work in perinatal mental health. But I also knew that I needed time. And although I tend to be a bulldozer and I'm going to do this right now, my way, however I want to, I had enough wherewithal to recognize the healing that needed to happen first. And so what I did was I continued to work in my therapy role, as a pandemic was happening, right? The pandemic happened 6 months after my AFE. And so it was just chaos at that time anyway. And, I made the decision to really dig into some trainings during that 3 years that I stayed at the boarding school postpartum. And I did trainings through Postpartum Support International, through Karen Kleiman's Postpartum Stress Center, and really got comfortable with the material and with sitting with others who have these same experiences on any scale when it comes to perinatal trauma. And I started to also build up my social media. So really connecting with others in this space who have had, again, similar experiences or who had patients with similar experiences. And that was a great way to start to get comfortable with hearing about stories and figuring out how to still take care of myself. And so I actually did not open my own practice focused specifically on perinatal trauma until 3 years after my son was born and I had my AFE. And that was probably one of the best decisions that I could have ever made. And so that's essentially how I transitioned. That was back in 2022. We both moved, both changed jobs, started a business, all at the same time. And it is, again, the best decision that I've ever made.
You've dedicated your career to caring for women. Now take your expertise further with the University of Cincinnati College of Nursing's online Women's Health Nurse Practitioner program. Prepare to lead with confidence, deliver compassionate, evidence-based care, and empower women at every stage of life. UC's online program combines academic excellence, innovation, and the flexibility you need to keep advancing your career on your schedule. Make women's health your next step. Join a nationally recognized leader in nursing education. Visit online.uc.edu/programs/nursing today.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you decided to do that. I feel like it's changed the lives for so many people who have, gone through any kind of perinatal trauma, to be able to find a community. And the two of you have both created really beautiful communities for survivors and families and providers alike, I would say. Miranda, can you tell me a little bit about the AFE Foundation? Tell all of us what it does, what you do, some of the stuff that you can provide to listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Kayleigh also being humble when she said she built up her social media. She laughs at me because I say millions of people, but she has impacted such a significant number. In fact, I just forwarded her an email, and I don't know if you've seen it yet today, of we had we had, unfortunately, a case sent in this week by a provider. And we always ask, could you share with us how you came to know us? And the response was, we listen to podcasts, and we follow the Birth Trauma Mama, and she talks a lot about the AFE Foundation. So that's how we knew you existed. So she is a total powerhouse when it comes to trauma, all things trauma, and definitely AFE as well. So a little bit more about the organization. It's evolved so much. We've been around for 17 years. It's easy to track because it's the same age as my kiddo. But it's starting to blossom into the, like, what I'd always envisioned. I obviously didn't envision it would take this long. We are coming on the 100th anniversary. Next year will be mark 100 years since it was first described in the literature. And I think about the first 80 years and how little was uncovered, unveiled, understood in those 80 years. And then I think about what we've been able to do in the last essentially 20 years, is to create a space where people can talk about it. But we've got a lot left to do. But we do three main things. One is, as we've talked about, supporting families and creating a community where something that's not talked about in the what to expect when expecting, something that is never going to come up in the prenatal space, that happens and catches families, by total surprise. So we've really tried to create a place where people can come and be validated and get lay language information around this condition, and to be there for the grieving families, to honor our AFE Angel Sisters in a way that feels good, but also is to create a space for a lot of people who've been touched by AFE. So that is the individual patient, that is their family members, that is their care team, that is their best friends, that is their siblings. I could tell you most of these people's pets' names too. Like, even the pets are impacted when these events occur. So a lot of support. We also recognize that my initial inspiration really was to do research. It was, why is this happening? How can we make it stop? How can we know who's at risk? Because this is devastating. It's like an atomic bomb going off in a family. And so I researched. That was my primary focus. And then I realized I had to take a step back. Research wasn't going to happen overnight. And we had to create a space where both patients, families, and providers would trust us. And that meant that we had to become the experts. And, I hear so often, like, advocates talking about how they're the experts of their own bodies. And I guess the burden and the blessing for us is that I only have to know one thing, and that's AFE. But I have to know everything about it. But I don't have the cognitive load that many nurses and physicians have, which is like, you have to know a lot about a lot of things. So, I'd like to safely say that I believe we are experts in this condition, from a biology understanding to a scientific background to the emotional impact of it. And a lot of that work is understanding the emotions has really been through Kayleigh's expertise in helping us really digest what happens in the mental health space around these conditions. So it led to education. And that's where Kayleigh and I have been able to work together as well, is how can we educate providers to be prepared for these events? And then how can we prepare them for what happens after these events? And that's where that therapeutic support comes in. And Jamie, I know you know this from your background as well. And we've had a chance to work together, and thank you so much for including us. And that is, in the aftermath of AFE. So we really do three things: support, education, and research. We publish papers. Kayleigh and I worked on a very robust communication guide and a communication framework to help, like Kayleigh said about these debriefs and these patient debriefs, is how do we ensure that we're not further harming the patient, mentally and emotionally after these events, as well as the family. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we do.
That's great. Well, and that's how you and I got connected, Miranda, was when I reached out. I always joke that I slid into Miranda's DMs on LinkedIn when I was looking.
Immediately respond.
Yeah, I know. It was like instant, right? And I was reaching out because somebody at a facility had reached out to me because they experienced an AFE in their facility, and they were looking for a debrief of their nursing staff who was really having a hard time coping with it, even though the patient survived. And so I wanted to make sure that if I was going in with information that I had everything correct, right? And so I reached out to Miranda and we connected, and she was like, well, hey, do you want me to come present with you? And I'm like, yeah, why not? That's awesome. So we ended up, kind of working together on that, and thus started our friendship and love affair. But and yeah, our friendship. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to build on that because the two of you do a lot of interaction in the AWHONN space. So a lot of our listeners probably already know you. They may have seen you talk. Kayleigh and I joke around that we have to actually travel to conferences across the country and in other states to see each other, even though we live like not that far away from each other. But we've all, done kind of the speaking at section conferences and everything. And then for the last few years, you've had a booth at the National AWHONN Convention, where you've both actually attended. And so what I'm trying to say is you've had a lot of interaction with AWHONN and with nurses. And I was hoping both of you could tell me just like what that experience has been like, kind of coming in from your space, the advocacy space, the survivor space. Just tell us a little bit about what that's like, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think for me, and obviously Miranda and I will have kind of different perspectives, but I think for me, seeing the impact in real time that these experiences have on nurses has only further lit the fire for me in helping nurses recognize, acknowledge, and find some self-compassion for all of the trauma that they themselves have experienced. I have known that just from my own experience of AFE and the nurses that took care of me and working with the AFE Foundation. But to see it in real time, to see people come up to our booth, immediately burst into tears because they've experienced an AFE event, a patient with an AFE, is difficult to articulate what that experience feels like, especially as someone who, again, survived one of these events and knows the nursing staff and the impact it has on them. It really opened my eyes to how much work we have to do on that side of the bed as well, and how these two types of trauma do not happen separately. That if we are willing and able and focused, as I believe we should be, on nursing and provider trauma, that is going to positively impact patient trauma. Because it's so difficult to treat from a traumatized nervous system. I'm not saying nurses don't do it. Oh my gosh, you guys are like, your compartmentalization. Whenever I have a nurse who is a client, I'm like, oh, I'm in for the just amazing compartmentalization. We're going to have to figure out some ways to help with these protective parts because they are strong for a good reason. And you also deserve so much more in terms of, again, acknowledgement and support and treatment for your own trauma. And being, on the patient side of that, I believe that does absolutely, that is the answer in a lot of ways, in my opinion, to patient trauma. And so that, to a long-winded answer to your question of that is a lot of what I took away is the humanity and the compassion and the empathy from nurses. is magical. You guys are the best. You're my favorite people. Whenever I do speaking engagements with nurses, it is such a different vibe. I don't know how to explain it, but it's this like maternal, like beautiful, empowering vibe. And everyone else is like fine and great. Don't worry. But like nurses, when I step into a room of nurses, it's just like, I know it's going to be magic. And it's just, I'll leave you with that, but it's the best.
I will definitely share that same sentiment in terms of working with AWHONN right away. I don't know. I'm trying to think about my first interactions with AWHONN. I think it came through my work in California at CMQCC. There is nothing like AWHONN. And, I say that with great respect for all the other societies, for physicians and other nursing genres or focus areas. My husband is an ICU nurse, and they're unique and special as well. But I have found that, especially the leaders in AWHONN, whether it was like from 15 years ago to current leadership, has been so validating and so respectful. It was, I don't have initials. You'll see on our things, look, you guys have, whole alphabet soup under you. I don't have initials. I don't have those credentials, but I have never once felt like I don't belong at the table with nurses. And there's been plenty of times and no hard feelings, right? Of like, oh, we'd like you to, they send an email, dear Dr. Klassen. And I'm like, well, hold on. I'm not a physician, because they've been asked to speak and they're just making the assumption because it's going to be to physicians, and physicians only want to learn from other physicians typically. And that has not been my experience with AWHONN. We did one of my mentors, Eleni Segas with the Preeclampsia Foundation, really, also her and I have worked on many boards together, and we always walk away and say the same things. Like, we get to work with researchers and physicians and, insurance companies. Like, we get to work with a lot of different people, but man, it is the nurses that are the lifeblood of healthcare. And I think we all know that, but until you've been in a place as a patient to feel like this is your people. And I think you've said that too, just in this podcast, of like, no, I think we work together enough to say that this is your space too, is, what an incredible gift to give somebody like myself. I would not, nor would the foundation be where we are without the support of AWHONN. No, hands down. We have an amazing medical advisory board that opened a lot of doors, Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, NIH, that kind of stuff. But it's really been the nurses who have allowed us to come and present at their state chapter meetings. And I think that there's like, oh yeah, we want you to come speak, or we want you to work on this project. And it's the afterwards when they realize, wait, being able to marry education with a lived experience sort of gives the emotion to the motions of like what we're asking people to do. I will say, Kayleigh and I also, having just been patients in this space, is like recognizing the trauma that happens and how are we here to serve them likewise. Like, this is our gift back to the nurses that help save our lives. How can we give back to nurses? But I think also is having the ability to understand your scope of practice and what other challenges that you face in this space, and recognizing we're asking a lot for nurses to be prepared for these events. There's 4 million births a year, and 100 to 150 are going to be in AFE. And you have such a cognitive load. I just genuinely respect how AWHONN has allowed for us to come in and talk about something that is rare and that is scary. And there's not a lot that can be done in these situations in terms of treating the patient, to give us even an hour of the time on a tight agenda, knowing how much you guys have to manage, because as healthcare changes and evolves, it seemingly comes down to the nurses taking on more roles and responsibilities.
Thank you for acknowledging all of that and for saying all of that. I hadn't heard you guys say those things before. All I know is that when I've seen you at the national convention with the booth set up, there's always a crowd. There are always people there. And I think this summer you brought tissues, whereas maybe you didn't prior. I don't remember, remind me, but I remember after Phoenix, you guys were like, we're going to need to bring some tissues because people come up to us and they really, need to kind of process their experiences. And I think it's such a gift that you give all of us just by acknowledging how traumatic it can be, because, and like Kayleigh knows, it doesn't necessarily have to be an AFE that somebody, witnesses or experiences as the care provider to experience trauma in the space. And we don't even call it that, right? We don't even recognize that what we're feeling is the effects of trauma, is the effects of resource trauma, where we don't have enough staff or we don't have what we need to kind of get by. We are traumatized by, all the different things that we see, whether it's, hemorrhages frequently or, crash C-sections and fetal demises and the pandemic, they all just sort of add up to this like cumulative nature of trauma. But we don't even put words to it. We just know that what we feel is like you pull up to work and you're in the parking lot, and getting out of the car some days is really hard, and walking in. And I remember when I was on the floor walking up and seeing the assignments, and you would just see the list of rooms that were full and how everybody was doubled up, and you instantly knew what kind of night it was going to be. And it is traumatic. And I think that putting words to that, not just from the patient side, but to the provider side as well, is really impactful. So thank you for helping us kind of process that and for giving us the language and the space to work through all of that. Speaking of trauma, you see it, you hear it from the families that you talk to and the providers. How do you both take care of yourselves, or what are some of the things that you do to help process that so you can continue to do this work?
Yeah, great question. I go to therapy. Definitely therapy. I have my people too, right? If I'm feeling, it's weird, and I think Miranda can speak to this too. We hear about AFEs happening in somewhat real time, Miranda more so than even me, but, and some just really hit you. They all hit you hard, but there are just certain details about certain ones that really are activating. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to take space, take time. We have to be able to vent to people that we like. I will text Miranda and be like, man, this one is rough. I'm having a rough time with this one. Or I'll tell my husband. I'll text Jamie and be like, I'm having a rough time with this one, or it's been a lot of loss lately. And that's been really hard. So having my therapist, we be doing EMDR all the time, having my supports, and also some silly things, and maybe they're not silly to me, but might sound silly. I love reading. And I always feel better when I'm getting in my romance novels or my mystery, something that takes me out of this awful world at times, and allows me to dissociate in a somewhat healthy way, is something that I find as a really helpful support too. But I think that the most important part is being able to recognize the times when you hit your limit. Because if you don't, then you will burn out. You have to be able to recognize and acknowledge when something feels too heavy and too much, and have the supports in place that you need to be able to access when that time comes.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with Kayleigh. I was going to say, I call Kayleigh. I had to do a lot of similarly therapy, medication, which I'm still on. And I'm not sure I'll ever really be able to go off. I came into this with already pre-existing anxiety and depression. And so it's something that I'd already done a lot of heavy work with to have that, tool belt to be ready. And so I'm super grateful that although I've had it the majority of my whole life, I was able to do a lot of therapy or before this event occurred. Having an incredible group of um, other AFE friends is a really safe space as well, where I can I don't mean to, but like share that burden with of when certain cases like Kayleigh said come in, having a spouse that's in critical care so that I can debrief with him, and have access to a lot of physicians to have some of these like harder conversations around. But in terms of like my self care, I am a big bike rider. So, and I like the long grind. 40 to 100 miles is like my place of literally unplugging. And I go on the same place and I see the same stuff day in and day out when I ride. And it's just so interesting that even as I'm talking about this, I watch the same shows sometimes at night. So I have Schitt's Creek and Arrested Development and Parks and Rec on regular repeat. And people used to make fun of me for that. And I realized I read an article recently and it was talking about emotional regulation. And I think I shared this with Kayleigh because I was like, now I understand. It's because I don't want to be exposed to more trauma by watching TV. So I'm not going to watch The Pit. I'm not going to watch anything that has like heavy, heavy emotion. I watch stand-up comedy and I watch nature documentaries and I watch, these lighthearted shows where I already know that I'm not going to be triggered by them. So, I would say those are my two things: is riding my bike for long rides. And I've recently instituted, because we do run a crisis line 24/7. And so I get calls in the middle of the night and it totally changes my day. I get a call at 3 a.m. and, my sleep is disrupted. Right. And so I have dysregulation with like sleep and eating during that day. And so just taking some time to recognize, what do I need? So now when I'm over the weekends, I'm really trying to be very mindful about not thinking about work, because there is something to do. My to-do list, I think, might truly be a mile long. There's always something to do. And while there's always a sense of urgency for me, I've realized I do need time to not think about it, because it's not just the emotional, it's like the running of the company, like, all those different things.
Yeah, you both have like the business side that you have to deal with as well. And my brain is kind of spinning because I'm like, oh my God, I do that with the TV shows too. I watch shows, like the same shows that I've been watching for like 15 years on repeat, because I know what's going to happen and it's predictable, right? Like I know what's going to happen. And I watched The Pit for a little bit and then I was like, yo, this is too real. This is too accurate. And I am like, okay, I think I texted Kayleigh a lot about this. And then I stopped watching it. I'm like, all right, I'm done with this. It's too much, even though it's like in an emergency room, not an obstetric floor, but it's the same.
They just had a shoulder dystocia. Bryce, my husband, was talking about it. We had a shoulder dystocia and a hemorrhage.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that brought up a lot of feels for all of our obstetric nurses for how the shoulder was handled on that show. But yeah, it's kind of funny. When I was doing my maternal mortality work, I started and this is along your lines, Kayleigh, I color. Okay. I have like adult coloring books everywhere. And I have my own case of sparkle pens, gel sparkle pens that are pretty, and I color. And I will it's like you just sort of check out, but you're present, but your mind is just like, it's so soothing. So highly recommend finding a way to sort of regulate in that way. All right, we're going to wrap it up, but I wanted to ask you each, if you could just tell us briefly, what's next for both of you with the work that you're doing, and then we can close it out. Kayleigh.
I love that question. I don't know. So many things. Miranda and I have the same brain in this way, where we're like, all the things. What do you mean? I'm going to do all the things next. So very briefly, I'm expanding my perinatal trauma practice. So I'm bringing on a few new clinicians to be able to sustain higher caseloads and expand beyond Pennsylvania. So that's a big thing that we're doing. I'm continuing my podcast, which has been amazing. I'm actually getting more shout out to any nurses who are interested. I'm actually getting more nurses and providers on to share their experiences from that side of the bed. Interestingly enough, I had an AFE story shared, and then a nurse contacted me who was from that story and is sharing, with permission, her side of that event as well, which is really cool. So a lot more of doing kind of the provider and nursing trauma stuff as well as patient trauma, and then really doing more support work with the foundation. We just have so many fantastic ideas of how we want to be able to support our grieving families and our survivors, and again, providers and nurses who are treating these patients. So lots of cool stuff on the horizon.
I know we're so excited if we get just a little bit more extra pieces of Kayleigh. I could never have enough. I wish I could afford you full time and fund all of your ventures. And yes, I'm looking forward to lots of things that Kayleigh has in the works and in the hopper. For us at the foundation, I shared it's going to be the 100th anniversary of AFE. I think what's in the works for us is just continuing to expand, our hotline coverage. We're getting more and more calls to our hotline, really expanding our research to look at genetic opportunities to really explore our biorepository and all the specimens that we've been collecting over time. Expanding our team as our budget allows, which will allow for a lot more publications and projects. So I think that's it for us. Next year is going to be a big year, personally and professionally. I'm turning 50. My kiddo is graduating and probably going off to college. And it's the 100th anniversary of Win AFE. So, nothing like a trifecta of all the feels of getting older, becoming an empty nester, my kid successfully living to age 18. I don't know what's going to happen after that. He is a little daredevil. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what the future brings. Very hopeful.
I love that. We'll be turning 50 together, sis. Yeah, I know. Okay. Can you tell us the website for the foundation? Because I want to make sure everybody has it right. And I want to shout out the 3-credit course that nurses can take for free on AFE. It's a fantastic course, and it's a great way for everybody to learn and to increase your comfort. And it's a really good course. So can you tell everybody what the website is? And then I'll hand it back over to Bria.
You can find us 2 different ways, afesupport.org, or just type in amnioticfluidembolism.org and you will find us. Probably if you Google search AFE Foundation, we should come right up. That's the best way. And there's a lot of resources. The course, our simulation toolkit to prepare teams, as well as the education or the effective communication guides that Kayleigh and I were able to put together.
Awesome. And Kayleigh, tell us where everybody can find you as well, please.
Sure. You can find me at the birth trauma _mama on Instagram and TikTok, and then thebirthtraumamama.com. Or if you want to reach my therapy specific website, that is holdinghopeperinatal.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, friends. It's so wonderful to see you, and I can't wait to travel across the country to see you again at some point. But thank you for your time and for everything that you do for patients and families and all of us, the nurses and everybody. So thanks. Bria, it's all yours.
Group hug.
Group hug. So much. Group hug for sure. Oh, wow. Miranda and Kayleigh, thank you. Jamie and I were honored to have you both on AWHONN Insights because your life-saving advocacy is truly amazing. And you both should feel like sheroes for all of the work that you've done over the past 20 years. You're advancing the knowledge about AFE for thousands of clinicians and people giving birth. So we at AWHONN, we look forward to the continued collaboration of celebrating the 100-year anniversary. That's a big deal next year. And we're grateful for having you here today. Thank you for the shout outs for your sites. We will also list them on our website, which is awhon.org/podcasts. So for all of the listeners today, you can check out more of Miranda and Kayleigh's resources, read their bios, get connected with them as well. Please share this episode. As you heard, AFE is something that a lot of people who are having babies and even clinicians, they don't know about. So share it with one of your colleagues, one of your friends, someone in your family, and you can give them links to Apple, Spotify, we're on YouTube, but please recommend this episode. And anyone who has a comment about it can write us at podcast@awhon.org. So we appreciate your time today. Everyone, please stay safe and be well. Make women's health your calling. Now take the next step with the University of Cincinnati College of Nursing's online Women's Health Nurse Practitioner program. Lead with compassion, elevate your practice, and continue making a difference every day. Learn more at online.uc.edu/programs/nursing.